The morning sun poured through the blinds, painting long golden stripes across the bedroom. Hugh Grant lay still, staring at the ceiling as if it held the answers to the unease stirring in his chest. 11 years. 11 years of marriage. 11 years of thinking that he had built a life that no storm could touch. Yet that morning, as the world outside stirred to life, something inside him felt wrong. A whisper, faint but insistent, tugged at the edges of his mind. Not everything was as it seemed. Nakamanayam. He turned slightly and looked at Lily, asleep beside him, her dark hair splayed across the pillow, her hand tucked under her chin. She looked peaceful, serene, untainted by any suspicion, untouched by the knowledge that Matthew had begun to sense something was amiss. He watched her for a long moment, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the soft rhythm of her breathing. 11 years. He had loved her so completely, so fiercely, that he had ignored the small things, the subtle cracks in her stories, the fleeting glances she thought he wouldn't notice. His eyes drifted to the nightstand, where the magazine Lily had left out the day before rested. Something slipped from its pages, a hotel receipt. He picked it up and felt his pulse quicken. The date, last Friday. A weekend he had assumed she was visiting her mother. His chest tightened as he reread the line over and over, searching for an explanation. Perhaps it was an accidental charge, he told himself. Perhaps it meant nothing. But there was that nagging edge of doubt, a shadow that refused to be ignored. And Matthew slid out of bed, careful not to wake her. The quiet house seemed to amplify every sound. The creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of traffic, the soft rustle of leaves outside. His mind raced, and yet he felt a strange calm. It was the calm of someone who knows that the world as they believed it exists is about to shatter. He slipped on his shoes and left the house, the receipt clutched tightly in his hand, a talisman of the truth he was desperate and terrified to uncover. The drive was short, but it felt endless. Each turn of the wheel brought him closer to a revelation he both craved and dreaded. When he pulled up to the hotel, he didn't pause, he didn't knock, he didn't announce himself. He simply watched. Through the glass doors he saw her, Lily, laughing, her head tilted back in a way that had once been reserved for him. Her hand rested lightly on the shoulder of a man he didn't know, a man whose presence felt like a punch to the stomach. And then he saw it, what no husband wants to see. The man leaned in and she kissed him. Not a fleeting brush of lips, not a nervous mistake. It was deliberate, intimate, practiced. Matthew felt the world narrow around him. The air thickened, constricting, as if the universe itself had paused to witness his heartbreak. His vision blurred, yet he could not look away. The sound of her laughter, the ease of her touch, the warmth of her smile directed at someone else. It was a betrayal so deep that it tore through him like a blade. And in that instant, he understood the life he had believed in, the marriage he had dedicated himself to, had been an illusion, a carefully constructed lie. And back home, he sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the wall as if it might offer some clarity. Hours passed, the house remained silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock. Lily returned, humming softly, the scent of perfume lingering in the air, a reminder that she could still perform the life they had shared. She kissed him on the cheek, smiled, and asked about his morning. And Matthew? He smiled. A thin, practiced smile that hid the storm raging inside him. Pain, he realized, could be both destructive and clarifying. He had a choice: to confront, to scream, to destroy himself in grief, or to wait, to observe, to let the betrayal fester quietly, and then craft a response so precise that it would leave her world in ruins. He chose the latter. He began that very day. Silently, methodically, Matthew started piecing together a map of her lies. Emails, texts, bank statements, subtle inconsistencies in her stories, all clues to a deception that spanned years. He discovered that the affair wasn't new. It had been ongoing for 5 years, long enough to entwine itself into every aspect of her life. And worse, she had been siphoning money from his accounts, planning to disappear with the lover, leaving him bankrupt and alone. Matthew didn't panic. He didn't let anger control him. Instead, he let it sharpen him. He cataloged every detail, every misstep, every secret. He photographed messages, recorded conversations, saved every shred of evidence he could find. And in the quiet moments when no one was watching, he allowed himself to imagine the day when he would confront her, not with a shout, not with a confrontation, but with a revelation so complete that she could never recover. He also began observing her behavior, like a shadow in his own home. He noticed the way she hid her phone, the subtle nervousness when he entered the room unexpectedly, the careful selection of words when she spoke to friends. Each tiny clue was a confirmation of the truth he already suspected. She had been planning this for years, and she believed she was untouchable. Yet even as Matthew plotted his silent revenge, he could not escape the emotional chaos within him. He replayed memories, dissecting moments once filled with love and trust. The small things now took on new meaning, the whispered phone calls, the late nights at work, the laughter he thought was private. Each memory was now a dagger, twisting with the knowledge of her betrayal. And at night he would lie awake, imagining how he would dismantle her carefully constructed life. It would not be messy, not chaotic, it would be precise, like a surgeon removing a tumor. He would expose her lies, her deception, her financial thefts. He would reveal the depth of her betrayal to everyone who had ever trusted her. And he would do it quietly, invisibly, until the moment of revelation came like a thunderclap, leaving nothing intact. Matthew also considered her lover. Who was he really? A man complicit in years of deception, blind to the power he had underestimated in the man he had betrayed. Matthew would observe him, understand him, and use him as part of the inevitable collapse. He would watch their arrogance, their carelessness, until it fed the precise mechanism of revenge Matthew was building. The first step was patience. He could not act hastily. Each move had to be calculated, each observation noted, each interaction catalogued. He began to record everything: photos, messages, conversations, financial transactions. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the plan, another thread in a web that would eventually ensnare them both. Matthew spent hours each day silently watching, thinking, planning. He became invisible in his own life, a ghost moving through familiar spaces, all the while constructing the path of retribution. And through it all, a strange transformation took place. Grief turned to resolve, the turn to ties 9 to 9. Pain became clarity, and heartbreak became a sharpened instrument of justice. By the end of the first week, Matthew understood one truth with brutal clarity: love, as he had known it, was gone. Betrayal had replaced it. And in that betrayal lay the seed of something far more powerful, a chance to reclaim his life, to assert control over the one person who had tried to destroy it. Matthew Grant had lost his wife, but he had not lost himself, not yet, and he never would. Matthew Grant had always believed that betrayal had a single moment, an event that shattered trust in an instant. But the deeper he fell into the quiet investigation of his own marriage, the more he realized how wrong he'd been. Betrayal wasn't a single blow, it was 1,000 small cuts delivered over years. Cuts he had been too blinded by love to feel. The morning after he saw Lily in the hotel lobby, Matthew moved through the house with the calm precision of someone studying a crime scene. Every object felt unfamiliar now, tainted: the kitchen counter where they had shared morning coffee, the hallway where they had once danced on New Year's Eve, the framed photographs on the wall, smiling faces, captured lies. A grief sat heavy in his chest, but beneath it, something colder began to form, a sharp, controlled clarity. He didn't confront her, he didn't scream, he didn't even look at her differently, he simply watched. A man who had spent 11 years believing in love now learned the art of silence. The first discovery came easily, a forgotten password saved on their shared laptop. Matthew clicked, and Lily's email opened like a door she never meant him to walk through. What he found on the other side wasn't a single guilty message, it was an entire parallel life. There were emails stretching back years, buried under folders labeled with professional names, notes exchanged at strange hours, hotel bookings disguised as work travel, messages filled with half sentences and coded references. Friday's plan confirmed. He won't suspect anything. 3 months until we're free. Every line tightened something inside Matthew, compressing pain into something harder, sharper. He scrolled. More messages, more plans. A pattern emerged, methodical, calculated. Lily wasn't trapped in an affair. She wasn't confused, lost, or torn between two men. She was planning her escape, not just from him, but with everything he had built. Hidden beneath an email thread about home improvement invoices, Matthew found documents, bank transfers, account numbers, financial logs, and then the real punch: a hidden account under her name, a second under the lover's name, and another slowly drained from Matthew's own savings for nearly 3 years. Slow, steady, deliberate. She hadn't just betrayed him, she had stolen from him, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, trust by trust. Matthew sat back in the chair, his breath shallow, his pulse steady but strained. The world around him dimmed, as though his mind were pulling him inward, demanding full attention for what he was seeing. He clicked deeper. There were screenshots of their joint accounts, Notes Lily had typed: move small amounts, he won't notice. Another read: keep emotional distance. Ding and tech. Key. Make him believe he's failing. Matthew felt something inside him collapse so loudly it was almost audible. He whispered nothing, he cried nothing, he simply stared at a marriage dissected like an autopsy report. By noon, he had traced 5 financial accounts, 2 credit cards he didn't know existed, and a savings account under the lover's name where Lily had been quietly depositing money. Kank. By early afternoon, he discovered something worse. Lily hadn't only been manipulating him privately. She had been constructing a narrative about him, one she had fed to her friends, her co-workers, even her family. Messages to her sister, he's distant, I feel invisible, I don't think he loves me the same anymore. He's becoming controlling. Matthew leaned back in his chair, stunned. Controlling him, the man who had built his schedule around her dreams, her comfort, her happiness. Then came messages to her closest friend. I think he's losing interest. He barely notices when I leave the house. Sometimes I feel safer with someone else. Matthew closed his eyes, slowly. She wasn't just lying to him, she was preparing everyone else to turn against him when the day came. A controlled takedown of a husband who had loved her without hesitation. The weight of those discoveries pressed against Matthew's chest, but with each revelation something inside him changed. He felt the emotional threads binding him to her unravel one by one. Pain transformed into purpose. The man who had once seen Lily as his entire world now saw her for what she truly was, someone who had never once believed he deserved her honesty. And what she didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that Matthew was no longer the husband she thought she was manipulating. And he had become something else, a quiet observer, a collector of evidence, an architect of consequences. That evening, when Lily entered the living room with her usual soft smile, Matthew looked up at her with the gentleness she expected. She walked over, kissed his forehead, and curled up beside him. He held her hand, he listened to her talk. He nodded in all the right places, but his eyes held nothing, a hollow where love once lived, and she didn't notice. He watched her the way a detective watches a suspect, quietly, carefully, memorizing every detail, every lie, every inconsistency. Her phone buzzed twice. She tilted it away from him, smiling at the screen before locking it quickly. Yet Matthew smiled too, because he already knew the password now. He already knew the name attached to those messages. He already knew the hotel they would meet in next. He no longer needed to guess, he needed to watch. He needed to wait. And waiting, Matthew realized, was a skill he had perfected simply by being her husband for 11 years. Over the next few days, Matthew's quiet investigation expanded into something methodical. He began to track timelines, her work trips, her girls' nights, her sudden errands. He compared them with receipts, emails, and calendar invites she had forgotten to delete. The puzzle formed faster than he expected, and the truth was uglier than he imagined. Lily hadn't fallen into an affair. She had cultivated it, grown it, nourished it like a second life. A life she intended to choose over him. Matthew discovered messages where she and her lover referred to him as the obstacle. Another where they joked about how clueless he was. Another where she said, "Well, break quietly. He always does." Something inside Matthew shifted then. He would not break, not this time, not quietly. He would become the one thing Lily had never considered him capable of being, a man with power. He started visiting a small stationery store on the edge of town, buying notebooks with nondescript covers. At night, while Lily slept, he wrote everything down: dates, times, financial transfers, messages, receipts, send shots, printed and filed. An entire archive of betrayal, page after page, the notebooks filled with the truth Lily never wanted exposed. He became meticulous, calculated, detached. He studied her lover, an accountant named Daniel Whitmore, a man with a clean reputation and a stable job. A man who believed that Matthew Grant was just a dull, harmless husband destined to fade into loneliness while they ran away together. Matthew dug into Daniel's background as well: employment history, social media connections, personal vulnerabilities. If Lily thought she could dismantle Matthew's life silently, then Matthew would dismantle both of theirs, publicly. But not yet. He needed everything to be perfect. He needed patience. He needed Lily to continue believing he was blind, and she did. Every lie she uttered only made her more confident. Every evening she spent laughing on the phone with him made her more careless. Every night she kissed Matthew goodnight before texting another man made her more vulnerable. Matthew understood something new about betrayal then. The deeper it runs, the harder it crashes. And Lily had dug her betrayal deep. One night, as he sat in the dark study reviewing bank statements, Matthew stumbled upon the most devastating discovery yet. A notarized document drafted 3 months ago. It was a petition to separate assets, filed secretly, signed only by Lily. Her goal was clear. She wanted his house, his savings, his car, everything, and she'd been preparing the legal groundwork long before Matthew ever suspected a thing. Because she wasn't leaving him for love, she was leaving him for gain. Matthew closed the document, placed it in the folder, and let the final remnants of his old self fall away. The Matthew who believed in honesty, the Matthew who believed in commitment, the Matthew who believed in Lily. He was gone. What remained was a man newly born out of betrayal, a man who no longer sought answers. Only justice, only precision, only revenge. And by the end of the week, Matt understood something chilling. Lily had already left him emotionally, financially, socially. She was simply waiting for the perfect moment to leave physically. But what she didn't know was that Matthew had already begun crafting something far more powerful than any escape plan she had prepared. He was building a downfall, a quiet one, a psychological one, a complete one she would never escape. And for the first time since the world collapsed around him, Matthew felt something unfamiliar yet intoxicating: control. The trust had shattered. Now the revenge would begin. Matthew Grant had learned the power of silence. It was no longer the silence of grief, the silence of shock, or the silence of disbelief. It was a deliberate silence, a weapon forged from betrayal, honed with purpose. Every morning he moved through his home as if nothing had changed, smiling when Lily passed by, commenting lightly on mundane matters, maintaining the illusion of oblivion. And yet, beneath the surface, every glance, every movement, every word was measured, cataloged, stored for the day when the full weight of truth would descend. He became a ghost in his own life, invisible, calm, and unassuming. Friends would see him and remark how relaxed he seemed, how untouched by stress. Family would note his quiet patience, his willingness to let Lily take the lead in small decisions, but they didn't see the steel beneath the surface. They didn't know that every smile, every nod, every moment of apparent normalcy was part of a larger plan. Matthew began keeping a meticulous schedule, noting Lily's habits with the precision of a detective. She believed she could slip through her days unnoticed, but he observed patterns she had long forgotten existed: the way she lingered on certain phone calls, the careful timing of her outings, the micro-expressions she made when she thought he wasn't watching. Each detail was a piece of the puzzle, and Matthew was relentless in fitting them together. He started photographing small details: receipts left carelessly on counters, a hotel keycard on the nightstand, subtle signs that confirmed his growing suspicion. He bought a compact camera and positioned it unobtrusively in common areas, capturing moments Lily would never suspect. He recorded conversations when she spoke on the phone in the living room, documenting every laugh, every secret phrase, every evidence of planning. Each recording, each image, became another thread in the web he was weaving. Matthew's transformation was gradual but profound. The man who once wore his heart openly, who trusted completely, who believed in the inherent honesty of those he loved, was vanishing. In his place emerged something sharper, something cold, precise, and patient. His grief had been a fire, now it was a scalpel. Every action, every plan, every decision was deliberate, calculated, aimed at dismantling the life of the woman who had shattered his. He began to study Lily psychologically. It was fascinating, in a grim way, to see how she operated under the assumption of secrecy. She had grown careless, confident in the knowledge that she controlled the narrative. Matthew noticed small cracks forming, the hesitation in her eyes when she answered unexpected questions, the way her hand trembled when she fumbled with receipts, the subtle avoidance of certain topics. It was all evidence, all confirmation that his plan was progressing. Then came the decision to test her. Subtle, invisible traps designed to confirm the affair's extent. Matthew sent a message to an old friend, casually asking about a mutual acquaintance who didn't exist. Hours later, Lily's reaction confirmed that she had already discussed this fabricated person with her lover. He adjusted his methods. Each minor test became another insight into her deception, and with each success, his confidence grew. Matthew also began planting seeds of doubts, not loudly, not obviously, but in ways that would unsettle her without her realizing why. A forgotten document left partially visible, a casually mentioned appointment, the faintest mention of a conversation he had overheard. These little manipulations weren't meant to confront her directly. They were meant to fracture her composure, to make her more careless, more exposed, more vulnerable. And it worked. Within weeks, Matthew observed Lily making mistakes. A messable mistake. A slip of a message, a receipt forgotten in her purse, a schedule misaligned with her fabricated alibis. Each misstep confirmed his growing certainty she had underestimated him. She had assumed he would never notice, would never act, would never respond. She had assumed, in her arrogance, that he was a passive victim of her betrayal, but Matthew wasn't passive. He became methodical in his nightly routines. While the household slept, he would spread photographs across the study table, match them with messages and receipts, trace movements, and align them with financial records. The more he dug, the more intricate the web became. It wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about building a case so comprehensive, so undeniable, that no part of her life could remain untouched. And yet he restrained himself. Every day he reminded himself patience was his greatest weapon. The satisfaction of revenge would not come from impulse, it would come from inevitability. Lily would not leave the house and find him screaming, confrontational, or reckless. She would leave the house believing she had everything under control, only to step into the collapse Matthew had orchestrated with cold precision. He began to notice the way she interacted with her lover. In photographs and recordings, she leaned in, laughed softly, and touched him in ways that once belonged to Matthew. And still she failed to notice him. Not in the room, not in his eyes, not in the silent attention he gave to every detail. He realized how deeply he had been underestimated. That underestimation became fuel. Fuel for a patience that could endure months, even years, if necessary, until every part of the betrayal had been exposed. Matthew also began using his work as cover. As a paramedic, he could spend long hours away, visiting emergency scenes, making calls, or attending mandatory training, all while secretly monitoring Lily's routines and movements. His friends admired his dedication, oblivious to the fact that he was leveraging every moment for the single purpose of gathering evidence. Even in the most mundane tasks, Matthew found opportunity, a moment to photograph a receipt, a brief conversation to record, a casual observation of behavior that confirmed what he already suspected. In the evenings, when Lily thought he was asleep or distracted, Matthew reviewed everything. He cataloged photographs, organized recordings, and transcribed conversations. Every night, the stack of evidence grew taller, the web of betrayal becoming clearer. He traced the financial trails, mapped their secret rendezvous, and documented every lie Lily had ever told. What once would have caused him heartbreak now caused calculation. Every tear of grief was replaced by the clarity of purpose. And then, one evening, as he reviewed a series of photos capturing Lily meeting her lover at a small cafe downtown, Matthew noticed something that sent a thrill through his chest. The man she kissed, the man she smiled for, the man she had planned to run away with. He was sloppy in ways Matthew could exploit. He left his briefcase unattended, his phone visible. He spoke freely, assuming no one was watching. Every small mistake became another tool in Matthew's arsenal. Matthew began to imagine the consequences long before they would unfold. He envisioned Lily's shock when confronted, Daniel's disbelief as their careful plans unraveled, the public exposure of everything they had taken from him. But these were not fantasies. They were blueprints, calculated, measured, and precise. He would not act without certainty. He would wait, and he would strike in a way that left no question of her guilt. He also reflected on his own transformation. The man who once loved blindly, who believed in honesty and trust, had vanished. In his place was a version of himself forged in betrayal, sharpened by patience, and armed with evidence. He felt no desire for impulsive confrontation. There was no need for anger to cloud his judgment. The fire of grief had been transformed into the cold precision of planning, the kind that would make every moment of revenge inevitable. Matthew began to move through the house differently. He avoided unnecessary attention, refrained from questions that would reveal his awareness, and ensured that Lily continued to believe he was oblivious. And she did. She continued her routines, continued her affairs, continued her carelessness, unaware that she was being watched, catalogued, and measured. He became, in every sense, the invisible shadow, and shadows are patient. Shadows wait. Shadows know every secret. Shadows endure, and when the time comes, shadows consume. Matthew knew the moment of reckoning would arrive. But for now, the invisible shadow had become the master of the house, master of observation, and master of the silent, inexorable countdown to revenge. Matthew Grant had learned the most important lesson from betrayal. The loudest responses rarely achieve the greatest results. Anger shouted and raged, but silence whispered, and whispered could wound deeper than any scream. By now, he had become that whisper, an invisible presence threading through every moment of Lily's life. Every glance she cast, every careless word, every subtle gesture was catalogued. Every mistake she made was amplified in the quiet theater of his mind, and in the art of silence he found power. He continued to observe Lily carefully, but now observation had evolved into subtle manipulation. Every step he took, every smile he gave, every casual remark he made was calculated to reinforce her perception that she remained in control. Matthew never interrupted, never questioned, never threatened. He simply existed in the background, calm, composed, seemingly naive. And Lily, believing herself untouchable, became reckless. It began in small ways. A laugh too loud when she thought she was alone. A flirtatious comment sent via text that she assumed he would never see. A receipt carelessly left on the kitchen counter after a late-night rendezvous. Each act, insignificant on its own, was recorded and cross-referenced by Matthew, adding threads to the web he was weaving. But the brilliance of Matthew's method lay in its invisibility. To Lily, the house was empty of scrutiny. She believed herself free. She flaunted her affair in ways she would never have dared if she sensed the shadow lurking nearby. Matthew exploited this recklessness with surgical precision. He began introducing subtle inconsistencies into the information Lily relied upon. A message from him placed just where she would see it, implying awareness of a detail she thought private. A phone call interrupted at the exact wrong time, her hesitation captured and noted. An overheard conversation misrepresented to friends, a small seed of doubt, planted with care, and it worked. Gradually, cracks appeared in the confidence Lily had long depended on. At first, she noticed them subtly, a glance that lingered too long on her face from a friend, a hesitant tone in a colleague's voice, a momentary pause in a conversation where she expected affirmation. She blamed herself, or perhaps her lover, or the pressure of life. But the unease was real, and it began to grow. Matthew watched all of it with calm detachment. Every gesture, every subtle panic, every misstep was logged, remembered, and used to further dismantle her sense of control. Her carefully orchestrated lies began to unravel under the weight of doubt that he introduced silently, invisibly. He began exposing inconsistencies to her circle, not directly but in carefully constructed moments. A friend overheard a casual remark from him, noting how it contradicted something Lily had said. A coworker noticed her hesitation when recounting events. Matthew never accused, never confronted, never revealed the full picture. He simply allowed her credibility to erode organically, like water wearing down stone. The psychological tension was palpable. Lily began to panic in private. She paced rooms, checking messages, rereading emails, questioning every decision, every step she had taken. But she could not identify the source of the unease. There was no confrontation, no threat, no visible enemy, only the sensation that her life was unraveling. And it was, piece by piece, under the unseen hand of Matthew's precise, methodical orchestration. Matthew's revenge had become a symphony of control. Every note, every pause, every subtle variation was designed to make Lily question herself, question her choices, and feel the creeping inevitability of exposure. Even Daniel, her lover, became a pawn in this silent game. Matthew allowed him to believe that their plans were proceeding without incident. He observed their interactions, noting overconfidence, carelessness, and arrogance, flaws he intended to exploit. Every misstep was catalogued. Every miscalculation would later feed into the collapse that Matthew was meticulously constructing. Meanwhile, Matthew refined his own presence in the home. He remained the calm, composed husband, never giving any sign of awareness. Yet he introduced minor elements to feed the psychological tension, a casually placed photograph, a partially overheard comment, the faintest suggestion that he knew more than he did. Lily noticed the changes subconsciously, her paranoia growing without understanding why. She would lie awake at night feeling eyes upon her, even when she was alone. A chill would run down her spine as small inconsistencies in her carefully constructed story gnawed at her certainty. She could sense a force dismantling her plans, but she could not identify it. Each revelation she feared was impending, though invisible. She began second-guessing herself, leaving subtle clues in her panic that Matthew collected meticulously. Matthew, in the shadows, allowed the tension to build slowly, savoring every moment of her unraveling. He did not need to act aggressively or confrontationally. Every misstep, every anxiety, every crack in her composure was part of the design. By the end of each day, he had gained more power than he had ever held, not by force but by subtle, precise psychological dominance. He was no longer a man betrayed. He was a man who had harnessed his pain, transformed it into strategy, and weaponized it. Each day Lily grew more careless, more anxious, more exposed. Each day brought him closer to the moment when the quiet, invisible control he exercised would manifest as devastating, undeniable revenge. Matthew understood the critical truth of psychological manipulation. The victim must never see the hand guiding them. Fear, anxiety, and uncertainty are far more potent than direct confrontation. Lily was now trapped in her own web, and she didn't even realize it. By the end of the week, the effects were unmistakable. Friends noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. Colleagues whispered about her unusual behavior. Small mistakes were piling up, messages sent to the wrong person, hints left carelessly in public, suspicious absences. Matthew observed them all without interference, allowing the tension to grow organically. Lily's lover, Daniel, remained unaware of the precision of Matthew's surveillance. He continued to assume that Matthew was oblivious, confident in the belief that their secret was safe. Yet every interaction, every careless comment, every unnoticed detail was recorded, stored, and analyzed. Every piece of evidence would contribute to the eventual unraveling. Matthew's own transformation was nearly complete. The man who had loved blindly, who had trusted openly, who had been devastated by betrayal, was now gone. In his place stood a calculated observer, a patient manipulator, a silent predator. He had become the invisible shadow, always present, always watching, and always in control. The art of silence had been perfected, and silence, Matthew knew, could destroy with greater precision and psychological devastation than any confrontation ever could. And by the time Lily realized that something was wrong, it would already be too late. The threads of her carefully constructed life had been rewoven into a tapestry of inevitability. Every lie, every betrayal, every reckless act of arrogance would be exposed, unraveling her world in a way she could never anticipate. Matthew Grant, the man she thought she had outsmarted, had become the master of the unseen, and in the art of silence he would execute a revenge that was not only inevitable but utterly unstoppable. Matthew Grant had learned the rhythm of patience. He had learned to move invisibly, to observe without interference, to let every misstep fall into place on its own. But patience alone was not enough. Revenge demanded timing, precision. A day, a moment, a catalyst that would transform years of betrayal into a single, undeniable reckoning. He knew the day, his birthday. Once it had been a day of laughter, of cake and candles, of the subtle warmth of love he had believed eternal. A day Lily had once shared in perfect harmony, promising forever with a careless smile. Now, it was a symbolic day of vulnerability, a day she believed she could use to finalize her escape, to seal her plans, to step away with Daniel and all the spoils of her deceit. Matthew spent the weeks leading to it with surgical focus. Every detail of Lily's movements was logged. Every appointment Daniel had, every message exchanged, every financial transfer carefully timed. He anticipated their routines as if he could see into the very mechanics of their deceit. Every misstep, every careless display, every forgotten clue was not just noted, it was deliberately cataloged for maximum effect. And the house itself became part of his orchestration. Cameras placed discreetly, recordings aligned with events, notebooks with timestamps and cross-references stacked neatly on the desk. Friends and allies were subtly informed, poised to act when the time came. Legal documents were quietly prepared, assets secured, contingencies in place. He had built an empire of evidence so meticulously detailed that there could be no argument, no escape. Yet Matthew's brilliance was in the subtlety. Lily remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering in silence. She continued her reckless behavior, flaunting her affair in ways that would have once shocked him, but now only amused him, because every careless act was a brick in the wall that would soon imprison her. Matthew reflected on the years of betrayal as he moved through his silent days. 11 years of trust shattered. 11 years of shared plans, laughter, and intimacy turned into a meticulously documented record of lies and deception. Each memory, once a source of comfort, now fueled his grim satisfaction. He felt no joy, only clarity, a serene, devastating focus on the inevitable. And he thought of the early signs of Lily's betrayal, the small excuses, the hidden messages, the subtle manipulations. At the time, they had seemed minor, even forgivable. But in retrospect, they had been the first stones of a foundation she thought would support her escape. Matthew had watched them fall into place with painful clarity until the foundation itself became a trap he was building, step by step, observation by observation, misstep by misstep. As the day approached, Matthew began the countdown in earnest. He set subtle triggers to ensure the perfect convergence of events. Lily's lover would arrive at the precise moment. Friends would notice the first hints of inconsistency. Legal contingencies would activate silently, leaving her with no path of escape. Every move was calculated, every reaction anticipated. Akana. He studied Lily's face in the mirror, noticing the faint tension lines that had begun to form. Anxiety now whispered in her eyes. She had no idea why, but something was off. The world she thought she controlled was subtly shifting beneath her feet, guided by an unseen hand. Matthew watched, calm and patient, as the threads of her carefully constructed life began to fray. On the eve of the day, he reviewed everything once more. Photographs, recordings, receipts, transcriptions, legal filings, all aligned perfectly. Each item was a testament to her deception, a weapon in the arsenal of his revenge. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not a triumphant roar, but a steady, controlled certainty that the moment was near. The night was calm, almost unnaturally so. The house held its breath, shadows stretching across walls like silent witnesses to the events about to unfold. Matthew moved quietly, placing final reminders and triggers, ensuring that nothing would be left to chance. Every camera angle, every document, every subtle hint of evidence was positioned for maximum impact. He thought of the first time he had caught Lily's betrayal. The shock, the grief, the hollow ache in his chest. They had forged something stronger, colder, and more precise than any love he had once known. That moment had been the spark. Years of observation, manipulation, and preparation had been the kindling. And now the day of reckoning was imminent. Matthew understood the psychology of fear intimately. He knew that true terror did not come from confrontation alone. It came from inevitability. Lily would not see it coming. She would not recognize the invisible hand guiding her downfall. Every panic, every slip, every moment of doubt would have been planted long before she realized the consequences. And when the culmination came, it would be undeniable, complete, and devastating. He moved through the house one last time, ensuring every detail was aligned. Notes left in strategic places, recordings queued, allies informed, legal filings ready. Even the smallest variables had been accounted for: an unexpected visitor, a delayed message, a minor argument. Matthew had planned for contingencies within contingencies, leaving nothing to chance. The night deepened, and the world outside seemed to hold its breath along with him. Matthew lay awake, reviewing every scenario, anticipating every reaction. He was calm, composed, and utterly in control. Years of betrayal, grief, and observation had culminated in this precise moment, a day that would once have been a celebration, now a carefully orchestrated countdown to destruction. He imagined the moment Lily would realize the inevitability of her downfall, the panic in her eyes, the shock in her voice, the sudden clarity that she had underestimated him, every detail meticulously envisioned. Every small misstep she had made, every careless act of arrogance, would converge in a moment that could not be escaped or denied. Matthew felt no joy, only the steady satisfaction of inevitability. This was not revenge born of impulse. It was revenge as art. Years of planning, observation, patience, and precision had transformed him into a master of consequence. Lily had believed herself untouchable, but Matthew knew otherwise. She was a pawn in a game she never understood, and the final move was imminent. The countdown had begun. And when the hour arrived, when the carefully timed events converged, Matthew Grant would step out of the shadows and into the final act of a drama years in the making. The calm before the storm had settled over the house, the pieces were aligned, the trap was set, and the moment of reckoning, the moment when betrayal would meet its inevitable consequence, was only hours away. Matthew closed his eyes, breathing deeply. He felt the culmination of pain, grief, and calculation settle into a singular, focused determination. Everything he had endured, observed, and prepared would now converge into a single, unstoppable truth. Tomorrow, Lily would awaken to a world she no longer controlled. Tomorrow, Matthew Grant would begin the final devastating act of justice. The countdown was over. The invisible shadow had prepared. And the storm was about to descend. The morning of Matthew Grant's birthday dawned with an eerie calm. The air was thick with anticipation, though Lily, of course, felt none of it. She awoke, bright and careless, assuming that the day would be like any other, a day for celebration, laughter, and the quiet closing of her meticulously orchestrated escape plan. She had no idea that the invisible clock had reached zero, that the threads she had spun for months and years were about to be pulled taut, unraveling everything she had believed secure. Matthew rose before the sun, his movements precise, deliberate, and utterly calm. He moved through the house silently, checking the subtle triggers he had planted: cameras, recordings, documents, financial transfers, and carefully positioned notes. Thing was aligned perfectly. Every small misstep Lily had made over the past months, every careless message, every forgotten receipt, every lie she had whispered to friends, colleagues, and her lover was ready to converge into a single, devastating revelation. He paused for a moment, gazing at the wall where he had pinned photographs, transcriptions, and timelines of her betrayal. Her smile in those images, so trusting, so arrogant, now seemed almost tragic. He felt no malice in that instant, only the cold clarity of inevitability. The years of grief, heartbreak, and observation had led to this precise moment. A moment where truth, carefully hidden, would become a weapon of overwhelming force. Lily bustled about in the kitchen, humming softly, arranging small gifts and party preparations. She was oblivious to the shadow that had become her husband, oblivious to the precise orchestration that would soon shatter her world. She believed herself clever, untouchable, flawless in her deception. Every laugh, every careless glance, every whispered word had been catalogued, measured, and stored by Matthew, the silent master of her downfall. As the first guests arrived, friends, colleagues, neighbors, the circle of people who had unknowingly been manipulated into the orbit of Matthew's plan, Matthew watched from the threshold. He greeted them with calm politeness, appearing relaxed, even cheerful. Lily noticed, but she did not suspect. She continued her flirtations, her small displays of confidence, her subtle boasts of freedom and triumph. She did not know that each display was a brick in the collapsing wall of her life. The first phase of the plan began subtly. Matthew allowed small inconsistencies to surface first, the gentle unraveling that would draw attention before the full collapse. A message to a mutual friend, a casually revealed financial detail, an overlooked email, all seemingly minor, all carefully placed. Guest began to notice peculiarities, hesitations in her answers, slight contradictions, the faint scent of unease in her demeanor. Lily's confidence began to waver, though she remained unaware of the invisible hand guiding the day. At Matthew's allies, friends and associates he had quietly informed, acted as subtle reinforcements, ensuring that attention was drawn to the inconsistencies without revealing the full picture. Each observation, each question, each raised eyebrow was part of the silent symphony of exposure. The audience of the story sees it clearly, the trap closing, the threads tightening, while Lily remains blind to the orchestration. And the second phase began as the party progressed. Guests were guided toward small revelations, mails inadvertently shown on devices, photographed receipts displayed under pretense, and subtle mentions of accounts. And each revelation was minor in isolation, but, when observed collectively, painted a vivid portrait of deception. Lily's movements grew more frantic. Her carefully rehearsed narratives began to fracture. She glanced at Matthew, seeking reassurance, only to find calm detachment staring back. And then came the final, most devastating act. Matthew had timed it with cruel precision, the public revelation of Lily's affair and financial manipulation. He invited the local legal consultant, quiet, professional, meticulous, to the gathering under the guise of a gift or surprise. As the documents were distributed, showing the full scope of financial transfers, secret accounts, and falsified statements, Lily's eyes widened. Panic overtook her. She tried to speak, to argue, to mask the inevitable, but every word faltered in the weight of undeniable proof. Daniel, her lover, was blindsided entirely. He had believed in Lily's careful orchestration, in the invisibility of their deception. Now he was exposed, caught in a network of evidence meticulously built over months. Every step he had taken, every careless move, every public display of arrogance had been noted, photographed, and documented. He grasped at explanations, but Matthew had already anticipated every argument, every defense, every attempt at escape. The guests witnessed the unraveling with a mixture of shock and fascination. Friends who had once trusted Lily now saw the depth of her deceit. Colleagues who had respected her professionalism now questioned every word she had spoken. Her social credibility collapsed in real time, her panic and confusion magnified by the careful orchestration Matthew had created. Matthew remained calm, almost detached, observing the chaos with a measured gaze. He did not gloat. He did not laugh. He simply watched as the consequences of betrayal unfolded with surgical precision. Every reaction, every misstep, every word spoken in desperation was anticipated, catalogued, and allowed to play out exactly as he had envisioned. Lily's face drained of color. Her laughter, once confident and carefree, turned into a trembling gasp. She stumbled over explanations that held no weight against the evidence presented. She looked to Daniel seeking solidarity, only to find him equally trapped in the collapse. Their carefully constructed world had been dismantled, piece by piece, under the silent guidance of a man they had once believed powerless. Matthew stepped forward, calm and composed, his voice steady. He spoke of truth, of trust, of the consequences of deception. He did not need to raise his voice. The weight of evidence spoke louder than any words. Every guest in the room understood the meticulous precision, the years of observation, the deliberate patience that had created this moment. The shock, the betrayal, the calculated brilliance of revenge, it was all undeniable. As Lily's world collapsed, Matthew felt the subtle satisfaction of inevitability. Not joy, not triumph, but the steady, controlled certainty that justice had been served in the most precise, psychologically devastating manner possible. Her panic, her shame, her disbelief, all were magnified by the knowledge that she had underestimated him completely, that she had believed herself untouchable. Daniel, humiliated and exposed, attempted to flee, but the legal and social consequences Matthew had prepared ensured there was no escape. He had left nothing to chance. Every detail, every contingency, every eventuality had been accounted for. The trap had been set with ruthless precision, and now it had closed. Matthew walked through the room, observing the aftermath. Friends whispered among themselves, colleagues exchanged glances, and Lily's face was a mask of despair. He felt no vengeance in the moment, only the cold clarity of justice delivered. The years of grief, betrayal, and observation had culminated in a single decisive act that left no doubt. The invisible shadow had finally stepped into the light, and the consequences were total. And then, in the silence that followed the chaos, Matthew spoke softly, almost to himself. Your world was built on lies, and lies have a way of collapsing under their own weight. The guests remained in stunned silence. Lily's collapse was complete, not just social, not just legal, but deeply personal. The woman who had believed herself untouchable had been undone by a man she had once scorned, a man she had betrayed. The brilliance of Matthew's revenge lay not in anger, not in confrontation, but in the careful, methodical unraveling of a life built on deceit. As the party disbanded, as whispers of scandal spread through the city, Matthew stood quietly in the center of the room, calm and composed. He had reclaimed his life, restored his dignity, and ensured that betrayal had consequences. Yet beneath the calm exterior, a scar remained, a reminder of the depth of pain, of love betrayed, and of the cost of trust placed in the wrong hands. The anniversary, once a symbol of love and celebration, had transformed into a funeral of deception, arrogance, and betrayal. And as Matthew left the room, stepping into the quiet of the night, he knew the truth of his own reflection. He had survived, he had endured, and he had executed a revenge that was as precise as it was devastating. But some wounds do not heal, some scars remain, and Matthew Grant, having reclaimed his life, would carry the memory of betrayal forever, etched into his mind, refined into patience, and remembered in every shadow he now walked silently through. Chapter Chi, the silence after the storm. The house was quiet, too quiet. The echoes of the chaos that had consumed Matthew Grant's life, his betrayal, his heartbreak, his meticulously executed revenge, lingered in every corner, but the world outside moved on with indifferent pace. The storm had passed, leaving devastation in its wake, yet Matthew remained, silent, observing the aftermath not with satisfaction, but with a profound awareness of what had been lost and what could never be restored. He walked slowly through the rooms, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The spaces where laughter once resonated now felt hollow, touched by a faint sense of absence. Memories, both tender and tragic, clung to the walls. The scent of Lily's presence lingered faintly, perfume, fabric, the subtle traces of someone who had once been intimate, trusted, and beloved. That presence, now gone in form but indelibly marked in memory, reminded him that revenge, no matter how perfect, could never restore what had been taken. Matthew paused at the living room, gazing at the photographs that had once captured happy occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, vacations, the smiles of two people who had once believed in forever. He touched the frame gently, feeling the smooth glass beneath his fingertips. Once, these were symbols of love and promise. Now, they were reminders of deception, betrayal, and the patient orchestration of justice. He thought of Lily, of Daniel, of the guests who had witnessed the unraveling of carefully constructed lies. Their shock, their humiliation, their panic. He had orchestrated it all with precision, but the echoes of their downfall, while satisfying in execution, carried a hollow undertone. Matthew realized that revenge is never a balm, It is a measure of control, a reclamation of power, but it does not heal the wounds that betrayal leaves etched in the soul. The night outside was calm, the moon casting pale light across the quiet streets. Matthew stepped to the window, gazing at the city that had witnessed the spectacle, the subtle whispers of scandal and revelation spreading through its veins. Social networks would buzz, friends would gossip, and Lily's name would carry the weight of her exposure. But to Matthew, these were secondary. The most important truth was personal. He had reclaimed his autonomy, his dignity, and his sense of control. Yet in that reclamation lay a stark, uncomfortable awareness. He was not the same man he had been. Time, which had once seemed a comfort, now revealed its dual nature. Years of love and trust had been lost, years of careful observation and manipulation had been spent, and the man who emerged from the storm was forged in patience, precision, and detachment. Matthew understood that he had survived something profound, not just betrayal, but the corrosive erosion of the person he had once been. The man he had loved blindly, the man who had trusted openly, no longer existed. He moved to his study, where every document, every recording, every photograph that had served as evidence of deception now rested neatly, catalogued, and secure. It was a testament to his methodical nature, the care with which he had dismantled an intricate web of lies. He reviewed the records briefly, not with intent to act, but as a ritual of closure, a final acknowledgement of the precision with ... which he had executed what could only be described as justice. Yet even in this quiet reflection, a subtle unease persisted. Revenge, Matthew realized, is never truly complete. The scars remain etched invisibly across the heart and mind. Trust once broken does not return. Innocence, once lost, is forever gone. And the mind, once trained in observation, manipulation, and patience, cannot unlearn the lessons it has absorbed. Matthew's awareness of human frailty, deception, and duplicity had grown sharper, more precise, and with it came a quiet, lingering tension, an understanding that vigilance is eternal, even after the storm has passed. He thought of the future solitary, measured, controlled. There would be no naive love, no careless trust, no easy laughter. He would move through life with the careful precision of a man who had witnessed the full capacity of betrayal and survived. The world would appear normal to others, but for Matthew, every interaction, every gesture, every word would carry layers of awareness, shadowed by experience, fortified by survival. And yet, amid the shadows, there was a strange, fragile liberation. He was free, unbound by deceit, unshackled from manipulation. The burden of betrayal had been met with deliberate, undeniable justice. Lily's downfall, Daniel's exposure, the public unraveling of carefully concealed crimes, these were the trophies of patience and precision, reminders that even the darkest wrongs can be addressed when one has the fortitude to endure. Matthew settled into a chair by the window, hands folded, eyes focused on the distant cityscape. The lights below twinkled, indifferent, beautiful, unknowing. He allowed himself a moment to feel the weight of survival, the clarity of having seen betrayal for what it was, having endured it, and having acted with precision and restraint. No celebration, no triumphalism, only the calm knowledge that the balance had been restored, even if at great personal cost. Memories surfaced unbidden, Lily's laughter, the subtle warmth of her smile, moments of shared intimacy that had once been precious. Matthew acknowledged them silently, not with longing, not with regret, but as recognition of the life that had once existed and would never exist again. That past, filled with love, trust, and vulnerability, had been destroyed by deception, and yet recon taken away, it had been the crucible that forged the man capable of reclaiming control. Even in solitude, the echoes of pain remained. He felt them not as weakness, but as markers of resilience, reminders of the cost of patience, observation, and carefully executed justice. The audience senses it too, that even in the aftermath of victory, the human soul carries shadows, traces of the betrayals endured, the lives disrupted, and the scars that remain invisible but indelible. Matthew's reflection drifted to the subtle truths he had learned, that vengeance is not the obliteration of an enemy, but the restoration of balance, that power lies in precision and patience, that trust, once given, is fragile beyond measure. He understood that love could not be naive again, that openness could not be unguarded, that the lessons of betrayal had become permanent, immutable. The room remained silent, the quiet punctuated only by the distant hum of life beyond the walls. Matthew Grant, survivor, observer, avenger, understood that this silence was both a gift and a burden. The storm had ended, the reckoning completed, but the weight of memory, observation, and experience would linger indefinitely. He stood finally, moving toward the doorway, casting a long shadow across the floor. His reflection in the glass was steady, composed, and resolute. The scars of betrayal, though invisible, were etched into his being, shaping every thought, every movement, every decision. Yet he walked forward with control, with calm, with the understanding that he had reclaimed his life, even if it would never be the same. The anniversary had indeed become a funeral of deceit, of arrogance, of trust misplaced, but also a quiet testament to endurance, patience, and the subtle art of retribution. Matthew had acted with precision, patience, and inevitability. Justice had been delivered without theatrics, without spectacle, only through careful orchestration, psychological insight, and unwavering control. As the night deepened, the house finally settled into stillness. Stee Concher, Kamashwalter Rapsti Bergschwerpischel. The echoes of betrayal had faded, the chaos had dissipated, and the storm had passed. And yet the lingering tension remained, a subtle undercurrent that reminded Matthew and the audience that revenge, once executed, leaves scars persist, memories linger, shadows follow. Matthew Grant, having walked through heartbreak, betrayal, and meticulously executed vengeance, and understood this more profoundly than anyone could. He had survived, he had reclaimed control, and he had observed the ultimate consequences of human deceit. Yet within the calm, within the quiet, there remained a subtle, haunting truth. Revenge may restore balance, but it never erases the past. And as he gazed into the night, he allowed himself one final thought, whispered softly to no one, and to everyone who had witnessed the silent storm, justice is served. But the heart remembers everything. The silence after the storm was complete. And Matthew Grant, survivor, observer, and master of the unseen, had finally stepped into it, forever changed, forever vigilant, and forever marked by the echoes of betrayal.